Ireland, land of rolling green hills, Guinness, and, well, let's just say a history of colourful characters. But today, we're not talking about leprechauns or pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. We're going deep into the underbelly of Ireland, exploring the shocking stories of the country's wealthiest crime families. We're talking about empires built on violence, drug trafficking, and good old-fashioned intimidation. These families have amassed fortunes that would make your eyes water, all while operating outside the law. Their stories are like something out of a gangster film, full of shocking twists, dangerous characters, and more money than you can shake a shillelagh at. Over the next few episodes, we'll be meeting the kingpins, the enforcers, and the families who profited from their illegal activities. We'll be looking at how they built their empires, the law enforcement agencies trying to bring them down, and the devastating impact their activities have had on Irish society. So, buckle up, because we're about to take a trip into a world where loyalty is tested, danger lurks around every corner, and the streets are paved with more than just good intentions. This is the real-life story of Ireland's richest crime families. Limerick, a city steeped in history, but also a city haunted by a more recent and more sinister legacy, the reign of the Dundon family. Imagine, if you will, a city held hostage by fear, where whispers of the Dundon name sent shivers down spines. This wasn't some Hollywood script. This was Limerick in the grip of the McCarthy-Dundon gang. The Dundon brothers, Wayne, John, Desi, and Ger, weren't content with just blending in. They wanted it all: power, respect, and most importantly, wealth. They climbed to the top of Limerick's underworld through sheer ruthlessness, turning neighbourhoods like Southall, Ballinacura Weston, and Moose into their own personal fiefdoms. Their weapon of choice? Fear. They ruled through intimidation, making it clear that crossing them was worse than biting the hand that fed you. It was like biting into a viper's nest. Drug dealing was their bread and butter, their cash cow, their golden goose, but they weren't ones to shy away from a little diversification. Robberies, extortion, you name it, the Dundons dabbled in it, leaving a trail of misery and fear in their wake. And the money? Oh, the money. It flowed like Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. Designer clothes, flashy cars, houses overflowing with luxury goods. The Dundons lived large, a constant, in-your-face reminder of their power and influence. Now you might be thinking, living that flashy, it's a bit daft, isn't it? And you'd be right. You see, the walls of their ill-gotten empire were built on foundations of sand. The law, like a patient but determined terrier, was slowly but surely sniffing out their every move. And then it happened. The house of cards began to crumble. The murder of Roy Collins, an innocent man caught in the crossfire, became the catalyst. Wayne Dundon, the alleged mastermind, found himself facing a life sentence. It was a blow, a chink in the armor, but the worst was yet to come. John Dundon, another brother, was soon convicted of murdering Shane Gilligan. Another life extinguished, another life sentence handed down. Then came Desi Dundon's conviction for the murder of Kieran Keane. The Dundon reign of terror was unraveling faster than a cheap suit, but the authorities weren't finished. Oh no. They weren't just content with locking them up. They went after the loot, the ill-gotten gains, the spoils of a life of crime. The Criminal Assets Bureau swooped in, seizing properties, cars, you name it, stripping the Dundons of everything they built. The party was well and truly over. Chapter 3. The Copey family, Limerick's shadowy grip. If you thought the Dundons were the only show in town, you'd be sorely mistaken. Limerick, you see, has a knack for breeding hard cases. And hot on the heels of the Dundon reign came another family, equally notorious, equally feared, the Copey family, also known as the Keane Copey Gang. Led by the infamous Brian and Kieran Copey, these lads weren't interested in playing second fiddle to anyone. They carved out their own slice of Limerick's underworld, turning St. Mary's Park into a no-go zone, a fortress where they reigned supreme. Drugs, always the name of the game, were their primary source of income. They flooded the streets with their illicit substances, lining their pockets while tearing apart communities. But their ambition didn't stop there. Armed robbery, extortion, they were like kids in a sweet shop, sampling every vice on offer. And just like the Dundons, they weren't shy about throwing their weight around. They were major players in the Limerick feud. a brutal turf war that painted the city red. It was a time of brutal violence, a time when loyalty was tested and lives were lost with alarming regularity. Chapter 4. The Enforcer, Paul Rice and the Shadow of the Kinahans. Paul Rice. A name whispered in the shadowy corners of Dublin pubs. They say he's the muscle, the enforcer, the one you really don't want to cross. And looking back at his history, well, it's not hard to see why. Back in '95, he gets caught up in a bank robbery gone wrong. Shots fired, the lot. 10 years he got, banged up in prison. You might think that'd be enough to set a lad straight, but for Paul it seemed like just a taste of a life he was already getting a taste for. This wasn't the end, not by a long shot. This, you see, was just the beginning. Out he comes, and wouldn't you know it, he's soon rubbing shoulders with some of the most dangerous criminals in the country, the Kinahans. Now, those are names you don't want to mess with. Drug trafficking, extortion, you name it, they were into it. And Paul, he fits right in, becomes a trusted lieutenant. He's their debt collector, the man who makes sure people pay up. And if they don't, well, let's just say it's best not to dwell on the possibilities. Word on the street is Paul's involved in some serious operations, millions of euros worth of drugs flowing in and out of the country. Chapter 5. The Menace Within. Michael Murray and a Reign of Terror. Now, we've met some right characters in our time, haven't we? But even I was taken aback when I first heard about Michael Murray. See, the name Murray, it might not send shivers down your spine like some of the others, but Michael, he's a different breed. This is a man who's already spent a good chunk of his life behind bars. 19 years, can you imagine? And for what? Abduction and rape. It's the sort of thing that makes you question everything, makes you wonder what goes on in a person's mind. But that's just the tip of the iceberg with Michael. He gets out, tries to put it all behind him, you'd hope. But no, he ends up back inside. This time for harassment and threats. 16 years they gave him. You'd think that'd be the end of it, wouldn't you? But even prison walls can't contain the likes of Michael Murray. From inside Midlands prison, he starts making phone calls, harassing people, threatening them, and then it takes a truly sinister turn. Bomb threats aimed at government buildings, even the Irish Parliament itself. It's 2021 and Ireland's Justice Minister, Helen McEntee, becomes his target. Imagine that, a man locked up in prison threatening the country's top law enforcement official. He calls the Samaritans, of all people, uses this chilling phrase, Red October, says there's a bomb, that it's going to go off. Panic ensues, of course, police searching Minister McEntee's home looking for explosives. Thankfully nothing's found, but it sends shockwaves through the country. How can a man already imprisoned still pose such a threat? It's unsettling, to say the least. They haul him back to court, of course. Michael, being Michael, denies it all. Says his confession was about something else entirely, but the evidence is stacked against him. Another conviction, another 2 years added to his sentence. You'd think he'd learn his lesson, wouldn't you? But no, he keeps making those calls, those fake bomb threats, causing chaos, sowing fear, all from the confines of his prison cell. It's like he enjoys it, thrives on the attention, on the knowledge that he can still disrupt, still frighten, even from behind bars. Michael Murray, a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones who seem to have nothing left to lose. Chapter 6. The Drug Lord's Downfall. John Gilligan and the Price of Greed. John Gilligan. Now there's a name that conjures up images of a bygone era, a time when Ireland's underworld was awash with cash and the smell of fear hung heavy in the air. Gilligan, you see, he was a different breed. Started small, like most of them do. Petty theft, nicking things that weren't nailed down. But ambition, it burned bright in John Gilligan. He had a nose for money, for opportunity. And in the 1990s, that opportunity came knocking in the form of cannabis. Tons of it flooding into Ireland. Gilligan, he saw the potential, the sheer scale of the profits to be made. And he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He built an empire on that green gold, became one of the biggest drug lords the country had ever seen. But Gilligan, he wasn't content to just hide his wealth away. Oh no, he wanted everyone to know his name, to see what he had achieved. He bought properties, businesses, anything to legitimize his fortune, to give it a veneer of respectability, his pride and joy. Jessbrook Equestrian Centre in County Kildare. A sprawling monument to his success, a place where he could rub shoulders with the elite, all the while knowing that his fortune was built on a foundation of misery and addiction. Gilligan, he lived a life of luxury, surrounded by the trappings of wealth. Fancy cars, expensive clothes, he had it all, but it couldn't last forever, could it? You see, when you fly too close to the sun, you risk getting burned, and for John Gilligan, that burn came in the form of Veronica Guerin. A journalist, fearless and determined, she was on his trail, exposing his empire piece by piece. Then the unthinkable happened. October 1996, Veronica Guerin was murdered, gunned down in broad daylight. The nation was in shock, outraged. Gilligan, he denied involvement, of course, but the finger of suspicion pointed squarely at him. The walls were closing in. The police, under immense pressure to bring her killer to justice, launched a full-scale investigation into Gilligan's activities, and they found what they were looking for. That same year, Gilligan was arrested, charged with drug trafficking. His trial was a media circus. The evidence was overwhelming. Gilligan, the man who had seemed untouchable, was found guilty, sentenced to 20 years in prison. The Criminal Assets Bureau, they moved in like sharks, seizing his properties, his cars, everything. Jess Brook, his beloved equestrian centre, it was all gone. John Gilligan, the once mighty drug lord, was left with nothing but the cold reality of a prison cell. His story, a cautionary tale of greed, ambition, and the ultimately futile pursuit of power at any cost. Chapter 7. The Addams Family. A very British crime family, the Addams Family. You might think, with a name like that, we'd be talking about a nice family from a sitcom, but you'd be wrong. The Addams Family we're talking about are about as far from a sitcom as you can get. They're more like something out of a gangster film, really. We're talking serious organised crime, drug trafficking, extortion, even rumours of gold bullion heists, and they built quite the empire for themselves right here in London. The Addams brothers, Terry, Tommy and Patrick, they weren't just your run-of-the-mill criminals. These chaps were known for their sharp suits, their taste for the finer things in life, and their ruthlessness. They were the epitome of the phrase dressed to kill. They weren't afraid to use violence to get what they wanted, and they had a reputation for being utterly ruthless. Now, I'm not one to judge a book by its cover, but when you hear stories about the Addams family and the lengths they went to protect their business, well, let's just say it sends a bit of a shiver down your spine. Now, one thing that always fascinates me about these crime families is how they spend their money. I mean, it's not like they can just walk down to the bank and open a savings account, is it? Terry Addams, the head honcho of the family, he was known for his love of the high life. Expensive wines, tailor-made suits, you name it. He even had a thing for classic cars, which is a bit ironic, considering the line of work he was in. And let's not forget their property portfolio. They had houses all over London, and even a few holiday homes scattered around Europe. I mean, it's not like they could just pop down to Spain for a fortnight in the sun without attracting a bit of unwanted attention, could they? But what really gets me is the sheer audacity of it all. These guys were living like kings, while the rest of us were just trying to make ends meet. It's like they were living in a different world, a world where the normal rules didn't apply. Chapter 8. The Kavanaghs, a family affair. Now, if the Addams family were the kings of London, then the Kavanaghs were certainly a force to be reckoned with across the Irish Sea. Led by Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, they were like something out of a gangster film. And believe me, their story is not for the faint of heart. We're talking about drug trafficking on a massive scale, connections to some of the most dangerous criminals in Europe, and a level of violence that would make your hair stand on end. Thomas Kavanagh, or the Bomber as he was known, was a bit of an enigma. He was incredibly secretive and he ran his organisation with an iron fist. But behind that tough exterior there were whispers of a family man, a man who doted on his children, who enjoyed the simple things in life. It's funny how these things often go hand in hand, isn't it? The harder the exterior, the more complex the man beneath. Now, the Kavanaghs, they weren't ones to shy away from the finer things in life. They had a taste for luxury cars, expensive jewellery, and their homes, well, let's just say they were more like fortresses. I mean, when you're living life on the edge like that, you've got to protect yourself, right? They had security cameras everywhere, reinforced doors, bulletproof glass, you name it. But it's a funny thing, money. It can buy you a lot of things, but it can't buy you happiness, can it? And it certainly can't protect you from the long arm of the law, because no matter how high you rise, no matter how much power you accumulate, The truth always has a way of coming out in the end. And when it does, well, let's just say it's not always pretty. Chapter 9. The Byrne Family, the Byrnes, a name whispered in hushed tones on the streets of Dublin. They say money talks, but in this family's case it practically shouts from the rooftops. A classic tale of rags to riches, if you consider mountains of drug money riches. At the head of the table was James Jaws Byrne, but it was his sons, Liam and David, who really put the family name on the map. Literally, you see, Liam, a man who clearly appreciated the finer things in life, wasn't content with just a modest bungalow and a used hatchback. He had a taste for the extravagant, a penchant for the finer points of luxury. His home, more like a fortified palace really, boasted a gym, a cinema, even its own sports pitch. I mean, who needs a garden when you can have a penalty shootout in your living room, eh? And let's not forget the cars. Oh, the cars. 31 of them, from what I hear. Rolls-Royces, Mercedes, you name it. Liam probably had one parked outside his house, just to make the neighbours jealous. But as we all know, all that glitters isn't gold, is it? You see, the thing about building your empire on a foundation of cocaine and shady business deals is that it tends to attract unwanted attention. And by unwanted attention, I mean the kind that wears stab vests and carries warrants. In 2019, the Criminal Assets Bureau, Ireland's finest, decided to pay the Byrnes a little visit. And let's just say they weren't there to borrow a cup of sugar. Over £1 million worth of assets seized in one fell swoop. Cars, cash, jewellery, you name it. They took it. Liam, realizing that perhaps his luck was running out, did what any self-respecting crime lord on the run would do. He hopped on a plane and scarpered. Word on the street is he's been living the life of a fugitive ever since. The Byrnes, once top dogs in the Irish underworld, now scattered and under constant surveillance. A cautionary tale, perhaps, about the fleeting nature of ill-gotten gains. Or maybe it's just proof that even the most elaborate facade can crumble faster than a digestive biscuit in a cuppa. Chapter 10. The Monk and His Millions, Jerry the Monk Hutch. Now, there's a name that sends shivers down the spines of even the hardest criminals in Dublin, but unlike the flashy, in-your-face gangsters we've met so far, Jerry was different. He was a man of simple tastes, a teetotaler, dare I say it, almost an ascetic in his own way. But don't let that fool you. Behind those steel blue eyes and that unassuming demeanor lurked a criminal mastermind. They say crime doesn't pay. But someone forgot to tell Jerry that. He pulled off some of the biggest heists Ireland had ever seen. We're talking millions, folks. Millions! The kind of money that could make Scrooge McDuck blush. But unlike some, Jerry wasn't one for splashing his cash on fast cars and fancy jewelry. Oh no, Jerry was a pragmatist, an investor, a property tycoon. He built himself a property empire that stretched from the Emerald Isle to the sun-drenched shores of Turkey. £1 million gaff in Dublin, villas in Spain, even a little something in London, just to keep his options open. Now, I've met my fair share of criminals in my time, but Jerry, he was a different breed. He wasn't in it for the fame, the power, or the adrenaline rush. He was in it for the long game, build a fortune, keep your head down, and live a life of quiet luxury. And for a while, it seemed like he'd pulled it off. No ostentatious displays of wealth, no unnecessary risks, just cold, hard cash invested in bricks and mortar. But as they say, every dog has its day. The name Hutch became synonymous with a bloody feud that gripped Dublin, a war that would shatter the family's carefully constructed facade of respectability. Jerry, once a ghost in the shadows, found himself thrust into the spotlight, his name splashed across the front pages, the Monk and His Millions. It's a story of ambition, of ruthlessness, and of the seductive allure of wealth. But it's also a story that reminds us that even the most carefully constructed empires can crumble, leaving nothing but dust and regret in their wake. Chapter 11. Outro. From the mean streets of Limerick to the luxurious mansions of Dublin, we've journeyed into the heart of Ireland's underworld, peeling back the layers of glamour and bravado to reveal the brutal reality of a life fueled by crime. These are stories of ambition and greed, of violence and betrayal, where loyalty is a currency as fleeting as the fortunes these families amassed. We've seen how the allure of easy money can seduce even the most unlikely individuals, drawing them into a world where the stakes are high and the consequences even higher. But perhaps most importantly, these stories serve as a stark reminder that crime, no matter how meticulously planned or cleverly disguised, rarely pays in the end. The families we've met, once seemingly invincible, have discovered that the path to wealth paved with illegal activities is often a dead end, leading to prison cells, shattered empires, and a legacy forever tarnished by their crimes.